I didn't cry on my wedding day. Not because I was brave, or strong, or numb. I didn't cry because I knew that if I started, I wouldn't stop. The ceremony took place in the west wing of the Rowe estate, beneath a chandelier that buzzed faintly, as if reluctant to shine on something so hollow. There were no flowers, no music, just a notary, 2 signatures, and the echo of my heels as I walked toward a man who wouldn't even look at me. Nathaniel Rowe stood tall in a dark suit tailored like armor. His hands were in his pockets. His eyes, cold and unreadable, flicked, once toward me, then past me, as if I were a placeholder in a business transaction. And maybe I was. I expected someone older, he said under his breath, when I stood beside him. I said nothing. My fingers tightened around the silk bouquet someone had handed me. White roses, not my favorite. My favorite were peonies, but I hadn't been asked. I was 24, a seamstress's daughter, quiet, dutiful, with a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice still tucked on my nightstand back home. I didn't belong in this house of polished floors and silent servants, but I was here because my mother was dying, because my father owed a debt no bank would forgive, and because Nathaniel Rowe, billionaire CEO and former protege of my father, had extended an offer. Marry him, quietly, legally. No scandal, no affection, expected. And in return, he would ensure my family remained untouched. The offer had been clear, cold, final. But standing next to him now, I wondered if he regretted it. The officiant read vows no one meant, and Nathaniel slipped a ring onto my finger without meeting my eyes. I did the same. His hand was cool, dry, impersonal. I had shaken warmer hands in job interviews. We signed the document, took a photo. The whole affair lasted 17 minutes. Later, a car took us to the other side of the estate. The bridal suite was massive, vaulted ceilings, ivory, curtains, and the faint scent of sandalwood clinging to everything. Nathaniel opened the door, gestured me in, and didn't follow. "I'll be in the south wing," he said. "You don't have to pretend." He left before I could ask what, exactly, I was supposed to be pretending. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands in my lap, and stared at the polished floors until the light faded from the windows. It was the first night of my marriage, and I had never felt more alone. I pulled off the dress slowly, folding the fabric as I'd seen my mother do 100 times after long days at her sewing table. My mother. Her name was Margaret. She had been a music teacher before illness drained the color from her skin and the song from her voice. But she still hummed, even now, especially when she cooked. Off-key renditions of Moon River and old lullabies, her fingers tapping against porcelain pots like piano keys. When I was little, I thought her humming meant everything would be okay. I reached for my bag, looking for pajamas, and that's when I saw it. A notebook, small, leather-bound, tucked between books I'd brought from home. I hadn't packed it. I hadn't seen it in years. It was my mother's old recipe book. I flipped through the pages absently, smiling at her notes in the margins. Add cinnamon for Henry. Let the dough rest. Don't rush love. And then, near the back, I found something I'd never seen before. A folded letter, yellowed at the edges, tucked behind a stained page for plum cobbler. It was addressed to me. Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means you're walking a path I once feared. I married your father in much the same way. Not for love. Not at first. But hearts are strange things, darling. They bloom where we least expect. If you ever feel alone in a house that's not yet home, remember this. The heart learns. Love may not arrive in grand gestures, but in quiet kindness, in stillness, in time. Give it that time. Mommy closed the notebook and held it to my chest, the way I used to when I was scared of thunderstorms. I wasn't crying. Not yet. But my throat burned with everything I couldn't say. Nathaniel hadn't touched me, had barely spoken to me. But there had been a flicker in his voice when he said, "You don't have to pretend." Not indifference. Something else. Resentment? Guilt? I didn't know. But for the first time since I walked into that chandelier-lit silence, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope. Not yet. But maybe a space for it. The mornings at the Rowe estate didn't begin. They simply emerged. Like fog from the lake beyond the hills, light crept in slow and soft, brushing over antique furniture and century-old picture frames that no one looked at anymore. I woke to the quiet, not peaceful, but sterile, the kind of quiet where even the walls seemed to breathe slowly. I hadn't slept much. The bed was warm, the sheets smooth, but my body stayed curled at the edge, muscles tight. My fingers still lingered over the leather-bound recipe book on the nightstand. Mother's letter had not left my thoughts. I must have read it 4 times before dawn. The heart learns. It didn't feel true. Not yet. I wrapped a cardigan around my shoulders and padded barefoot across the marble hallway. I didn't know if it was allowed, but I went looking for tea. Something familiar. Something hot I could hold on to. The kitchen, to my surprise, was not sterile. It was warm, even lived in. Not grand, but intimate. Wood cabinets, copper pots hanging like old memories. There was a kettle already on the stove, steam rising in a lazy swirl. Morning. I flinched. Nathaniel stood by the window, mug in hand, tie undone. He wasn't supposed to be here. His voice wasn't sharp, just flat, like a man who'd forgotten what softness sounded like. "Didn't expect you to be up," he added. I hesitated. "Didn't expect you to be here." He gave a faint shrug and turned back toward the window. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I reached for a ceramic mug, blue and chipped, clearly not from any curated collection, and poured hot water over a bag of chamomile. The aroma steadied me. I wondered if he'd leave. He didn't. Instead, he asked, "How's your mother?" It was the first time he'd mentioned her. The question hung in the air between us, surprisingly human. "She's resting," I said softly. "Still weak?" Nathaniel nodded once, slowly, but said nothing. His gaze remained fixed outside, at the tall trees lining the estate, swaying, slightly under early autumn wind. He looked like a man surrounded by everything, yet owned by nothing. I followed his gaze. There, just beyond the glass, was a small garden. Neatly trimmed, unnaturally perfect. But near the back, I noticed a wild patch, a corner that had grown unruly. And in the middle of that chaos, a single peony had bloomed. My favorite, a coincidence surely. But something in me stirred. Nathaniel finished his coffee and placed the cup in the sink without a word. I expected him to leave again, to vanish behind another closed door. But instead, he paused in the doorway. "I'll be gone for most of the day," he said, not turning around. "You don't have to pretend to be anything here. Just stay out of the south wing." And then he was gone. His footsteps echoed, growing distant. Just stay out of the south wing. A rule, cold and clean. But I didn't feel threatened by it, only curious. The rest of the day passed slowly. I unpacked my books, placing them on a window seat in the east hallway. I wrote a short letter to my mother and left it in her room, hoping she'd find comfort in the familiarity of my handwriting. I wandered through the drawing room, traced the spines of novels that hadn't been opened in years. In the afternoon, I helped the housekeeper bring a meal to my mother's suite. Her smile was faint but genuine. "Still humming?" I asked. She nodded. "Always." I wanted to tell her about the letter, but I couldn't find the words. So I sat with her instead. We watched the sun creep across the wooden floor. Before leaving, I stopped in the hallway. A photo hung there. Old, grainy. My father and Nathaniel, younger, smiling. Brothers in spirit once, before time and mistakes drew lines between them. My chest tightened. That night, when I returned to my room, something was different. A small envelope rested on the desk, ivory, sealed in red wax. There was no name. Inside was a receipt from the Willow Hill Hospice, a full year of advance payments. Paid in cash, anonymous. Dated 6 months before my father ever admitted our family was in trouble. Nathaniel. I stood there for several long minutes, heart pounding, not with romance, but with confusion. I didn't understand him. I wasn't sure I ever would. But a man who paid for a stranger's mother to live with dignity, that was not a cruel man. And maybe not a stranger either. I poured another cup of tea and walked toward the window. The moon was high now, silvering the garden below. The peony was still there, and for the first time since stepping into this house of glass and silence, I whispered a word I hadn't dared hope for yet. Maybe hearts did learn. Maybe kindness could be quiet. Maybe this place wasn't a prison. Maybe Nathaniel wasn't pretending either. And maybe, just maybe, this story was not going to end the way it started. There are truths you inherit, gently, and others that shatter something inside you. It happened on a Sunday. The hospice nurse had just left, and I was folding one of Mother's shawls by the window when she called my name. Her voice was softer than usual, and when I turned, I noticed how tired she looked. Not just sick, but emptied, like a house long abandoned by light. "Come sit," she said. I sat on the edge of her bed, the one lined with pale quilts and the scent of lavender water I still remembered from childhood. She reached into the drawer by her bedside and pulled out a thin envelope. It was already open, its contents yellowed with time. "Your father never meant to lie," she began. "But he did, and I need you to understand why." My heart stilled. The letter was addressed to Nathaniel Rowe, dated 7 years ago. In it, my father confessed to misappropriating funds from a private investment Nathaniel had entrusted to him. He had meant to pay it back, he wrote. Once the market turned, it never did. "You were like a son to me, Nate. And I was greedy, careless, and proud. I betrayed you." I read the words slowly, and then again. It wasn't a business deal gone wrong. It wasn't just debt. It was betrayal. Personal. Deep. Nathaniel hadn't married me to save us. He had married me to contain us, to keep the story from spreading, to preserve his company's reputation, and perhaps to punish us, gently. I looked at my mother. Her eyes were glassy. "He didn't press charges," she whispered. "He could have, but he didn't. Instead, he made an offer. To marry me," I said hollowly. She nodded. "He loved your father once, like a brother. I think he did it to protect his own memories of that time." I don't remember walking back to my room. The halls of the mansion stretched long and shadowed. No warmer than before, but no longer unfamiliar. I knew this place now. I knew what it stood for, what it tried to bury. When I reached the door to my room, I paused, and then I turned. The south wing was quiet. He had told me not to go there, but something in me needed to understand more. Not as a wife, not as a daughter, but as a woman trying to gather the missing pieces of a man she barely knew, and maybe wanted to know. The south wing was different, more lived in. A fire still glowed in the hearth of the study, and the bookshelves were scattered with papers, notes, and open volumes, marked with pencil. No marble, no glass walls, only oak and leather and books worn at the spine. I found the letter on his desk, not hidden, just waiting. It was addressed to no one, half written. I thought marrying her would close the wound, that it would be a transaction, clean and clinical, a seal on old guilt. But she looks at me with those eyes, and I find myself wondering if redemption ever comes quietly, or if it always stings first. I stood there, frozen, one hand clutching the edge of the desk. He was trying. He didn't know how, but he was trying. That evening, he returned late. I was already in the kitchen, chopping carrots for soup. I didn't expect him to speak, but he did. I heard you were in the South Wing. I kept my back to him. I was. He didn't answer right away. Then, in a tone far quieter than I'd ever heard from him, "I'm sorry." I turned. His tie was loose, and his voice, not fragile, but raw. "For what?" I asked. "For all of it." There was a silence between us then. Not cold. Just full. "I read the letter," I said. "The one from my father. And yours." His eyes closed for a second. He meant more to me than most people ever will. That's what made it hard. "And me?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "What do I mean?" He didn't answer right away, but then he took one slow step toward me, too, until the space between us held only questions. "You meant a name on a contract," he said, "and then you walked into that ceremony, eyes wide and unsure, and I realized I was not prepared to feel anything for you." His hand almost reached for mine, then stopped. "But I do," he said. I didn't cry, but my throat tightened, because the boy my father had betrayed had become the man who now stood in front of me, steady, scarred, and trying. "I don't know if I can love you," I admitted, "but I know I don't want to hate you." He looked at me then, fully, as if seeing not just the woman in front of him, but the girl who once sat by the stove, listening to her mother hum lullabies. "That's enough," he said. "For now." Didn't touch me. But I felt it. The shift. Like something old had cracked, and something honest had slipped through. That night, I sat in my room, candle flickering beside me, and reread my mother's letter once more. Love may not arrive in grand gestures, but in quiet kindness, in stillness, in time. Maybe this was the stillness. Maybe finally, time had begun. There's something tender about a man who keeps showing up, even in silence. The next morning, I found him in the garden. Not in the manicured rows of hedges near the veranda, but at the wild edge, where the ivy climbed the stone wall and the peony still bloomed defiantly in the chill of late autumn. He wasn't doing anything. Just standing there, hands in his coat pockets, gaze fixed on the far trees. I stood by the kitchen door, unnoticed. It wasn't the posture of a powerful man surveying his estate. It was someone who had stopped running. For once. I made tea that morning, as I often did. 1 cup for me, and out of habit now, 1 for him. Chamomile with a dash of honey. He never asked for it. I never asked why I kept making it. I set his cup outside his study again. Same spot. Same quiet ritual. He never touched it, but he never told me to stop. Later that day, I visited my mother. She was sitting up, bundled in soft-knit blankets, humming under her breath. The same tune as always. Moon River. "Your eyes look different today," she said as I helped her sit up straighter. "How?" "Less afraid." I smiled faintly. "I think I'm starting to understand him." She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. She handed me a folded napkin. In it, a tiny tin button, one from Nathaniel's childhood coat. He left this at our house once. I kept it. I turned it. In my hand. It was warm from her touch, worn smooth. I used to think you'd marry someone who brought you flowers, she added, eyes half closed. But maybe you were meant for someone who shows up. Without needing to be asked, that evening, I walked past the study again. His tea was still there. Steam gone. Forgotten, maybe. But the door was ajar, just slightly, and something about it made me pause. Inside, Nathaniel sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames, a worn envelope in his hands. He didn't notice me until I knocked. Gently, he looked up. Not startled, not angry, just present. I didn't mean to interrupt. You didn't, he said. Come in. I sat on the opposite chair. We didn't speak for a moment. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a deed. To a house. My childhood home. I blinked. This was sold, foreclosed. He nodded. I bought it, quietly, 2 years ago. I stared at him. Why? He looked back into the fire. Because some places are worth keeping alive, even if no one lives there for a while. A silence fell, between us, deeper than before. Not uncomfortable, but reverent. A moment held like breath. You kept it for me? I asked softly. He hesitated. At first, for your mother. Then, I don't know. Maybe for you. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat at my window, looking at the peony still blooming in the frost. I wrote a letter to myself. Something I hadn't done since I was 16. He's not the man I feared. He's the man I never knew I needed to see clearly. Stillness is his love language, and I think I'm beginning to understand it. The next morning, I changed something. I didn't leave the tea outside the door. Instead, I walked it in. Nathaniel was at his desk, reading. He looked up as I approached, but said nothing. I made it fresh, I said. If you want it. He stared at the cup, and then at me. I always wanted to, he murmured. I just didn't know if I deserved it. He reached for the cup with both hands, as if it were breakable, sacred. His fingers brushed mine. Warm. Grounded. I'm not my father, I said quietly. I know, he replied, and I'm not the boy he hurt anymore. There's a kind of healing that doesn't come from grand apologies, but from moments like this. A shared drink, a warm silence, the feel of ceramic between two people who used to stand oceans apart. The next afternoon I found him in the garden again, but this time he wasn't alone. He was helping Henry adjust a bird feeder on a low branch. My brother's laugh echoed through the chilly air, young and bright. And Nathaniel? He was smiling. Not a smirk. Not a businessman's polite half-grin, a real, tired, honest smile. Later, when I passed him in the hallway, he paused. I didn't expect him to be so much like you, he said. I tilted my head. In what way? Hopeful. Even when there's no reason to be. That night, I sat beside my mother and told her everything. About the tea. About the deed. About Henry's laugh in the garden. She didn't speak for a long while. And then, as I tucked the blanket around her shoulders, she whispered, You're not just learning to forgive him, Eleanor. You're learning to forgive the story you thought you'd been given. There was a knock at my door after midnight. When I opened it, Nathaniel stood there, holding something in his hand. It was the old tin button. I never forgot this, he said, but I didn't know where it had gone. I stepped aside to let him in. And for the first time since we were wed under a chandelier that never shone for us, I felt like a wife, not a transaction. We didn't touch. We didn't have to. But his voice, when he sat beside me, was softer than I'd ever heard. I didn't know how to love someone like you, but I think I'm learning. I found the letter when I wasn't looking for anything at all. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour where the house seems to hold its breath. Nathaniel had taken Henry into town to pick up new sketchbooks, and I'd stayed behind to tidy the guest room closet, the one we never used, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I was reaching for a loose shelf plank when my hand brushed something wedged into the back corner, brittle paper, folded tight, forgotten, a letter. No envelope. Just creases and the unmistakable handwriting of my father. I stood in the middle of the room, paper trembling in my hands. Then I sat slowly on the edge of the bed and began to read. Nathaniel, if this ever reaches you, it means I've failed to say what needed saying face to face. I stole more than your trust. I stole the brotherhood we built. And worse, I made Eleanor carry a weight she never earned. You see, I thought I could bury the past by selling my daughter's future. But now, watching her walk through this house, I realize she's more honest than I ever was. She doesn't hide. She stands in the light. I was wrong to make her the shield for my shame. And you, if there's a corner of your heart left that still knows the boy I once called my own, take care of her. Not because I deserve that mercy, but because she does. Robert Whitmore. I pressed the letter to my chest, eyes closed. It was the first time I'd seen my father's guilt spelled out so plainly, not in numbers or legal terms, but in truth. He had known, all along, that he had used me, that Nathaniel had loved him once, that he'd burned more than just a bridge. He'd singed the skin of everyone who tried to cross after him. That evening, when Nathaniel returned, I waited in the sitting room. The fire was lit, casting gold and shadow on the bookshelves. He stepped in, coat still on, and paused when he saw me. I found something, I said. He sat, quiet, patient. I handed him the letter. He read it without expression. But when he finished, his shoulders sagged. Not in defeat, but in release. He wrote this? He asked quietly. I nodded. He folded the letter once, then again, and set it on the armrest. I wish he'd said it to my face, he murmured, but maybe. I wasn't ready to hear it until now. We sat in silence, not out of distance, but reverence, for something that had finally arrived, late, but intact. I blamed you, I said, for being cold, for marrying me out of pride. Nathaniel looked at me. You weren't wrong. No, I said. I was. Because now I see it wasn't pride. It was protection. You were trying to hold the storm in your own hands. He blinked once. I didn't want you to drown in it. And I did anyway, I said with a small smile. But I think I'm learning to swim. He smiled back. Tired. Real. I kept the house, he said after a pause. Not just for your mother. I kept it because I knew one day you'd need somewhere to feel whole again. You never lived there, I said. I didn't need to, he replied. I just needed you to. Later that night, I returned to the kitchen, a place that had become, strangely, mine. I made tea. This time, I brought 2 cups back to the sitting room and placed one beside Nathaniel's elbow. He took it, drank, and then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a slip of paper. It was a list. On it, buy new sketchbooks. For Henry repaint Eleanor's childhood bedroom, call hospice director plant more peonies. I wrote it this morning, he said. Before you found the letter. I stared at the list, at the way he'd written my name without hesitation. You're planning a future, I said, barely above a whisper. I'm hoping for one, he answered, and then softly, with you. I didn't answer, not with words, but I took his hand, steady and warm, and held it in both of mine. In the days that followed, I read my father's letter aloud to my mother. She cried without sound, her eyes closed, as if hearing the truth allowed her to finally rest a part of herself she had carried too long. Henry painted a scene from memory. Me, sitting at the window with a teacup, the peony blooming below, and Nathaniel. He came home earlier, sat beside me more often, learned to ask, "How are you?" and stay for the answer. One night, just before sleep, I opened my mother's recipe book again. Tucked inside was another line I hadn't noticed before. Scribbled near the cobbler page. Forgiveness isn't something you give to the past. It's what you give the future permission to grow from. I traced the words with my thumb, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a guest in this house. I felt like a root. Small, perhaps, but growing. There are songs we stop singing not because we've forgotten the words, but because we've forgotten how it feels to be heard. The house had been so quiet for so long that I hadn't noticed the silence, only that something always seemed to press gently against my chest when I walked its halls. It was the quiet of spaces that remembered pain. But one morning, that quiet broke. Not with a sound exactly, but a presence. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the old pine countertop, when I heard it. Music. Piano. Soft. Simple. Not practiced. Not polished. Searching. I froze. The Rowe estate had a music room, tucked near the west wing, behind double doors I had never seen open. I followed the sound like a child might follow the scent of cinnamon, not cautiously, but hungrily. When I opened the door, I found him there. Nathaniel. Sitting at the piano bench, back straight, eyes on the keys like they were instructions he once memorized in another life. He didn't stop when I entered. His fingers moved slowly, as if translating something unspoken from inside him. It wasn't Moon River. It wasn't anything I knew, but it was enough. "I didn't know you played," I said gently, once the music faded. He looked up, not startled. Just present again, something I'd come to recognize in him. This way he had of being all there once he decided to stay. "My mother played," he said. "She taught me when I was young. I stopped after she passed." "When did she pass?" I asked softly. He paused. 20 years ago. So long. And yet it still echoed in his hands. "I always thought this room was for show," I admitted, stepping closer. "It was," he replied, "until this morning. We began sitting together in the evenings, not always speaking, sometimes reading, sometimes just sharing the same silence, which was no longer hollow but restful, like rain on a roof you no longer fear will leak. He played again the next day, something fuller, bolder. I hummed along without realizing it, and when I did, he stopped, smiled faintly, and began again, this time slower, so I could follow. It became a ritual. After tea, before dusk, music, humming. Sometimes Henry would sketch us from the hallway, grinning behind his sketchbook like a conspirator. One afternoon, I caught Nathaniel placing a folded paper beneath the flower pot in the garden. When I asked about it, he only said, "It's where your mother used to sit." I thought she might want to hear the music, too. I found the note later. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It read, "She still hums. Eleanor. Even when she thinks no one hears. I hear her now." The garden began to change too. Not because the groundskeepers worked harder, they didn't. But because I did. Nathaniel did. Even Henry planted a few seeds. The unruly patch near the peony grew wider, freer, more alive. It reminded me of our kitchen back home. Slightly messy, full of good things. My mother's condition had begun to stabilize, not improve, but settle into something less fragile. She spent afternoons by the window now, knitting quietly, eyes following the sunlight across the walls. "You seem different," she said one evening, while I was brushing her hair. "I feel different," I admitted. "Not fixed, just softer." She smiled. "That's not softness. That's strength learning not to be afraid." That night, Nathaniel joined us for dinner, something he hadn't done since our wedding. It wasn't elaborate. Roasted chicken, potatoes, bread I baked from one of Mother's old recipes. He complimented the crust. Twice. Henry chattered the entire meal. My mother laughed aloud at one point. And for a moment, brief but brilliant, it felt like a family table, not a contract fulfilled after dessert. Nathaniel reached for his wine glass and looked at me. "I haven't had a meal like this in years," he said. "Not since before." He stopped himself, but I didn't need the rest of the sentence. I knew it. Not since before life taught him to keep his guard up. That evening, he brought a record player into the music room. He dusted it off like it was an old friend and played a vinyl with a gentle crackle. Billie Holiday, "I'll Be Seeing You." We sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, not touching but closer than we'd ever been. "Why now?" I asked. He looked over, brow furrowed slightly. "Why are you letting me in now?" He thought for a moment, then answered, voice low. "Because you stayed, even when I didn't ask you to, even when I didn't know how to want it. And so we stayed." Each night became a small note in a larger melody. Soft, off-key sometimes, but real. Not a love story written in fireworks, but one told in the pause before sleep. The hand on a teacup. The hum of a song you didn't realize you'd remembered. And in the morning, as I opened the windows to let in the autumn breeze, I whispered something I hadn't said in years. "Thank you." To the house. To the quiet. To the man who never expected to be heard, but kept playing anyway. Grief doesn't knock. It lets itself in, barefoot and quiet, and sits in the chair no one uses. It folds into the walls, the linens, the light. You don't notice it at first. Not really. You just realize one day that something has changed, and it's not going to change back. My mother's decline was gentle. The kind of fading that doesn't start with pain, but with stillness. She slept more, spoke less, smiled in ways that felt distant, like she was already remembering us instead of living us. "I don't feel sad," she whispered one evening as I tucked the quilt beneath her chin. "I feel full." I nodded, but my throat wouldn't let me answer. Nathaniel sat beside her the next morning, not for ceremony, not for obligation, just to hold her hand. The fire crackled nearby, but he didn't seem to notice the warmth. He was focused on her. "I never had a daughter," she said to him, "but if I had a son, I would have wanted him to marry someone like her." His lips pressed into a line, then trembled slightly. He didn't speak, but he held her hand tighter. That night, I left the window open in her room. She loved the sound of leaves. I sat beside her bed, humming the lullaby she once hummed to me, and, when the last note slipped into silence, she was gone. No gasps, no agony, just quiet. Henry didn't cry right away. He walked outside and sat under the tree near the garden, sketching something with trembling hands. When he came back, he handed me the drawing. It was of my mother, eyes closed, head tilted toward a breeze we couldn't see, smiling. He'd drawn the peony beside her, still in bloom. The house didn't feel emptier. It felt more still, as if it were exhaling. Nathaniel canceled all his meetings for the week without saying a word. He brought warm bread from the bakery in town. lit the fireplace early each morning, wrote the eulogy by hand, though I never asked him to. I read it at the service. My voice shook only once, when I reached the line. She was the kind of woman who could teach a room how to be quiet without ever asking it to be. That evening, the house was full of soft footsteps, neighbors, old friends. No one stayed too long. That was how she would have wanted it. When the last guest left, I stood in the kitchen, the dishes untouched, the teapot cold, and stared at the chair where she used to hum. I didn't realize I was crying until Nathaniel appeared behind me. He didn't speak. He simply wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin gently on my shoulder. No pressure, no pity, only presence. She heard it, I whispered, wiping my cheek. The life we made here. She knew. I hope so, he murmured, because she gave us the space to make it. The next morning, I took the train back to the town I grew up in. Not to stay. Just to visit. I walked past our old house, the one Nathaniel had bought to protect. The shutters were painted now, the weeds trimmed. It looked like it had been waiting for me. I stepped inside. Dust in the corners. Faint smell of cedar and cinnamon. But there was a letter on the kitchen counter, addressed to me. My name written in my mother's handwriting. Shakier than before, but unmistakable. Eleanor, if you're reading this, I am where music never stops, and memories are warm as quilts. You did it. You built something beautiful from broken things, and now it belongs to you. Not just this house, that life. Let yourself belong there too. He loves you. I saw it. Quiet men love deeply. They just take longer to admit they're drowning. Let him swim toward you. And don't pull away. All my love. Mommy closed the letter and leaned against the counter, my heart louder than any sound in the room. And for the first time, I didn't feel torn between two lives. I felt like both could be part of me. One past, one present. Both mine. When I returned to the estate, Nathaniel was outside with Henry. They were cleaning the garden, clearing the fallen leaves. The peony still stood. "Welcome home," he said when he saw me. And I said it too. Quietly, but with certainty. Home. That evening, we had soup and buttered bread and tea that wasn't perfectly steeped. And as the fire crackled, I said the words neither of us had said yet. I don't want to be someone passing through this place. Nathaniel met my eyes. His voice was low. You're not. You never were. He reached for my hand across the table, held it like something he'd been learning to do in small, careful lessons, like something he wanted to keep getting right. And I knew. Without flowers or chandeliers or ceremonies, this was the real vow. I belonged here. Now. The house is quieter now. But it's a different kind of quiet. Not the aching kind that presses against your chest, but the kind that fills your lungs soft and steady, a quiet that says, you're safe here. It's been 6 months since my mother passed. Autumn has come again. The trees outside the kitchen window are just beginning to blush gold and rust, and every morning I open the window wider, not for air, but for memory, for her, for the peace she left behind. Some mornings, I hear myself humming in the kitchen, not on purpose, it just happens. Nathaniel notices. He never interrupts. He just smiles and sets 2 cups on the table, one for him, one for me, and we begin our day with quiet rhythm. It's funny how fast stillness becomes habit, and how, once you let yourself believe you belong, everything around you softens too. Henry's sketches now hang in the hallways, not framed like gallery pieces but pinned with care, like they're growing roots in the walls. He laughs more, asks more questions. Sometimes I catch Nathaniel reading next. To him, one hand resting on the edge of the paper as Henry draws. The man who once lived behind a wall of glass now walks barefoot through the house, sleeves rolled up, hands not always clean, but always doing something real. We never talked about love in loud words. It came in gestures. When I burned a loaf of bread one afternoon and cursed under my breath, Nathaniel quietly started slicing cheese and apples for dinner, as if that had been the plan all along. When I couldn't sleep the night before what would have been my mother's birthday, he sat with me on the porch swing. No questions, just presence. That's how I knew. He loved me, in the way some men show up in silence and never leave. One evening I found him in the music room again. The fire was low, the piano untouched. "I haven't played in a while," he said, noticing me at the doorway. "Do you miss it?" He nodded. "But I don't know what to play." I sat beside him and opened the old sheet music tucked beneath. The bench, it was my mother's. Faded pencil markings in the margins, her handwriting. He looked at the title and smiled. "The Heart Asks Pleasure First." Neither of us were very good, but we played, slowly, out of sync, laughing sometimes, starting over often. And when we finished, Nathaniel looked at me and said something he hadn't said before. "I loved you before I knew how to say it." I touched the keys again, lightly, and I heard it, long before you spoke it. We kept building, quietly. In the spring, we turned the old guest room into a study for Henry, painting the walls a deep forest green, the color of resilience. Nathaniel began working from home more often. The staff, once formal and careful, now teased him gently when he forgot his reading glasses in the pantry. I started planting in the wild garden. Lavender, basil, more peonies. Didn't ask if I could. He didn't ask why. He just brought me new gloves one morning and offered to dig. On the anniversary of our wedding, the first we'd truly share, I woke to the scent of coffee and something cinnamon. In the kitchen, he stood in an apron, holding out a plate of imperfect scones. "I used your mother's recipe," he said. "Sort of." I took one, still warm. "It's terrible," I laughed. "I burned the first 2 batches. They'd be proud," I said. He didn't ask who. We both knew. He poured the tea. Sat across from me, then reached into his pocket and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. My name. His handwriting. "Dear Eleanor, you walked into my house like a whisper and stayed like a hymn. I didn't know how to make space for joy. You taught me how. I didn't know I could be forgiven. You forgave me before I even asked. I didn't know what it meant to belong. Now I do. Not because I earned it, but because you stayed long enough to let me learn. Happy anniversary. I love you. Yours. Finally. Nathaniel." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the back of my recipe book, next to my mother's first letter. 2 women. 2 lives. One line repeated, "The heart learns," and mine had not all at once, not without grief, but with time. And with him. That night, we walked the garden path beneath a sky full of quiet stars. Nathaniel stopped near the peony bush, still blooming somehow, stubborn as memory. He touched my hand, fingers trailing mine. "Do you think we'll ever leave here?" he asked. I looked back at the house. Soft light in the windows, Henry's laughter faint from upstairs, a melody lingering on the keys of the piano. No one played perfectly, but everyone loved anyway. "No," I said. "I think we've already arrived. Sometimes when the sun is just right in the late afternoon, I sit on the porch swing with my tea and a pencil and write lines in the margins of my old books. Not for anyone, not even for him, just for me, because I belong. Here, in this quiet house that learned to sing again, with the man who forgot how to love but never stopped hoping he might. with the boy who paints joy into corners that once held shadows. And with a heart, mine, that still hums when no one is listening. Because now I know, the heart doesn't just learn to love, it remembers how.